Welcome to Introduction to Philosophy, Part 1. An obvious starting question is, what is philosophy? And the strict definition of the literal meaning is very straightforward. The literal meaning is love of wisdom, philo meaning love, and sophia meaning wisdom. As you might imagine, the nature of wisdom has been extensively debated. Now, in terms of explaining the subject matter of philosophy and what it's all about, essentially one can focus on these two aspects. One is, obviously, the subject matter. An academic field like philosophy can be defined in terms of its content. Like other academic fields, philosophy does not consist of a single monolithic subject. For example, you don't study a single thing called history, or a single thing called chemistry, where you take a class on chemistry and get all the chemistry. People study various parts of these fields. For example, a person taking a history course might be studying 12th century Japan, or the Second World War. Someone taking a chemistry class might be taking biochemistry, or some other sort of chemistry. Now, like other fields, philosophy is divided into various branches based on this content. And as one would expect, there is a great deal of debate about the proper subject matter of philosophy, what should be considered within philosophy and what should not be. Now, laying aside those concerns, one way to see what philosophy is about is look at it also in terms of the questions that it asks and tries to answer. So, like any other academic field, philosophy can be defined in terms of these questions that it raises and attempts to answer. For example, psychology asks questions about the mind and tries to answer these questions. As is the case with subject matter, an academic field can also be divided into branches in terms of the particular questions that are being asked. And, as you'd imagine, there's extensive debate over what counts as a proper philosophical question. Now, one way to get philosophy into some sort of context is look at its close relatives, science and religion. The sciences arose from philosophy, so there is a special relationship between them. If you ever wondered why, if someone gets a doctorate in chemistry or doctorate in physics, they have a PhD, a doctorate in philosophy, it's kind of a legacy or a relic of the idea that they originated from philosophy. Fields like medicine, they get their own MD because they don't want to be associated with philosophers. Similarly with law, separate ones. But philosophy doctorates, they typically have a link to philosophy, not surprisingly. Now, philosophy and science both address very similar, sometimes even identical questions, and employ very similar and sometimes identical methods. Both are concerned with such things as the origin of the universe, the nature of the mind, the nature of space-time, the foundations of ethics, the basis of human behavior, and so on. Both employ observations, symbolic logic, mathematics, hypothesis testing, and so forth. Not surprisingly, the boundaries between science and philosophy are somewhat vague. This often leads to controversy over what counts as a scientific and what question and what belongs in the realm of philosophy. Now, it's a common mistake to assume that science is concrete and provides definite answers, and that philosophy is merely theoretical and provides no definite answers. On the one hand, both can be highly theoretical. There's, for example, theoretical physics. And some parts of science today, I'm biased of course, but they seem to simply steal from philosophy. So if we're talking about things like parallel universes, the reality of space-time, those are firmly metaphysical questions, so very philosophical. Also, philosophy can be fairly concrete in terms of addressing things like making very pragmatic moral choices, for example. Now also, both science and philosophy are swamped, overwhelmed full of unanswered questions and intellectual controversy. If science provided definite answers all the time, there would be no debate, no disputes, and we would have all the answers. Now, some might think that philosophy doesn't do anything, as we'll talk about later, but one thing that tends to occur is once part of philosophy becomes well established and big enough to be its own field, it typically then branches off as a science. Now, if the sciences could be seen as perhaps the children of philosophy, if one would agree to that metaphor, philosophy and religion are more akin to being siblings, with probably religion being the older brother or sister. Religion probably came first. Yep, definitely came first. Now, faith, in the context of religion, is often seen as being in conflict with reason, often presented in the form of philosophy. Now, philosophy, as we'll see, began by offering alternative explanations to those given by Greek religion. And this is if we date philosophy back to the Greeks. There could have been someone, obviously non-Greek, way back, who created or developed philosophy, but we can only go with the records that we have. Otherwise, we are simply speculating, which is, of course, fine. Now, philosophers are often regarded and branded as atheist and anti-religious, a common view today. When people encounter me and find I'm a philosopher, they generally assume that I'm an atheist. And today many philosophers are, but as we'll see through the course of the course, many philosophers were very devout. In fact, in the medieval era, philosophers tended to be very religious, even through the modern era, and even today. Now, faith is often seen as irrational and beyond reason, which tends to lead to some conflicts between what we might see as faith and what some might regard as philosophy. Now, as we'll also see when we get to part 2, early Christian thinkers blame philosophy for many of the early heresies, and they were probably not wrong. Reason is often seen as a threat to faith and something that misleads people. And so there is considerable conflict between the two, but also considerable overlap and cooperation, because philosophy and religion do address many of the same problems, such as the existence of God, the nature of God, the nature of morality, the origin of the universe, the purpose of existence. And when one does, religion sort of in depth, as opposed to just, simply practicing it in an everyday sense, it gets heavily involved in metaphysics, as we'll see. Now, as I noted before, many philosophers have been religious thinkers, and many religious thinkers have been philosophers. And we'll see some examples of these. Our good dead friends, St. Augustine, St. Elsem, St. Aquinas, are non-saints, but still dead, Descartes, Locke, and Berkeley. While reason has often been used to attack religion, reason has also been used to defend and support religion. Now, one key debate here has been defining the proper sphere of each. Some thinkers take the spheres to overlap in some degree, so that philosophy can address some, but not all, matters in religion, and vice versa. Some thinkers take the spheres to overlap completely, so one can address all the matters of the other. One view is that religion should be used to address all allegedly philosophical problems, that all answers can be found in religion. Another view is philosophy and reason should be used to address all allegedly religious problems. Scientific atheists, for example, would be a kind of extreme example of this, but they would take the view that that solves all religious problems because religion is just made up. A third view is that religion and philosophy can be used interchangeably. Truth is truth, no matter how one reaches it. And some thinkers take the spheres to have no intersection at all. Each must stay in its own lane and not address aspects of the other. On this view, this divided view, religious methods are useless in dealing with philosophy, and philosophy has no role in religion. Now, some thinkers, notably the atheists, take the religious sphere to be empty. and in terms of that there's nothing really there. I mean, they don't deny that people go to church, synagogue, mosque. They don't deny that people talked about Zeus and God and so forth, but they regard it as having no real content in the sense that it's not talking about real beings. For the atheist, there are no gods or any god at all. And they hold that religion should be looked at purely in scientific terms, a matter for psychology, sociology, etc. Now, for the purpose of this class, it's assumed that reason is useful in addressing some relevant theological matters that connect to philosophy. But the possibility is, of course, left open. This assumption might be incorrect. Now, philosophy has a variety of branches. In our next exciting video, we'll take a look at some of these branches.